Welcome to Drumbeats, the must-listen-to podcast which explains why Indigenous partnerships are the key to securing successful outcomes in natural resource and infrastructure investment in Canada. I'm Mark McNack and my co-host Rob Branton are joined today by two guests from the opposite side of the capital flow that is reshaping major projects in Canada. Last October, BMO became the first North American bank to issue a labeled Indigenous bond, 200 million Canadian dollars, 4-year callable, proceeds ring-fenced for Indigenous-owned businesses and Indigenous communities. It was easily oversubscribed, and some investors won 3 to 5 times their allocation. That bond has since been named Environmental Finance's Social Bond of the Year. John Uhren, BMO's Global Head of Sustainable Finance, led that structuring. Jolain Foster, Managing Partner of Nation Building at Deloitte Canada, and herself, Gitsan and Wet'suwet'en, built and leads Deloitte's dedicated practice for preparing Indigenous nations to reach final investment decisions as equity partners. In this conversation, recorded live at the London Stock Exchange during the 2026 Canadian Indigenous Investment Summit, you will hear how the $10 billion Federal Loan Guarantee Programme is changing the capital stack, why proponents now treat Indigenous communities as preferred co-investors, and what BMO's demand signal tells European allocators about an emerging asset class.
Wow, Jolain Foster, the Managing Partner Nation Building Advisory at Deloitte Canada, and John Uhren, Global Head of Sustainable Finance at BMO Capital Markets. Welcome to a very special edition of Drumbeats. Very good to have you with us.
Good to be here.
Great to have you both here. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, John, just for our viewers?
Yeah, thank you, Mark. So I'm John Uhren. I'm Global Head of Sustainable Finance at BMO Capital Markets. I've been on the sustainable finance team for about 7 years at BMO, and really what we're trying to do is create sustainable products and sustainable outcomes for our clients that need capital. So they're looking for capital, they're looking for innovative financial solutions. We're able to tailor them in a way that achieves different environmental or social benefits. So it's great to be here to see some of the Indigenous participation ideas that were discussed, and I know we'll discuss a lot more today.
Jolain,
Hi.
tell us a bit about yourself.
Jolain Foster. I am Gitsan and Wet'suwet'en from the northwest of British Columbia inside Canada. Also the managing partner for Nation Building Advisory, which is a new practice within Deloitte, a strategy that I've led inside Deloitte with multiple partners and senior partners. And really what I wanted to do was create a way and a blueprint for nation building in how Deloitte can support nations, government, and corporate Canada and industry in doing nation building within Canada and eventually around the world.
Great. And we're very pleased that both of you were able to come to the summit. It was the first time for both of you. So we'll talk a little bit about your thoughts about the summit. And Rob, why don't we just get into some questions?
I am curious. We're fresh from the summit on location in the heart of the City of London at the London Stock Exchange. What are some of the thoughts that have stuck with you from the summit? Start with Jolain.
Well, I have to say this is my first time to London, ever. My first time to Europe. And when I came in, because I don't live in this world every day, I live to support nations in what they're trying to do in participating in the economy. So coming to this, it was all brand new for me, getting to know you guys and what your intention is. But the things that really stuck with me from the summit was the opportunity and the untapped opportunity that First Nations can access and better understand how to access capital and more capital to do what they need to do in leading projects in Canada and buying equity into major projects in Canada that can have huge impact for our communities. But not only that, recognizing that investors here involved in the London Stock Exchange, better understanding who we are and what we can bring to the table when it comes to bringing more certainty to whether it's infrastructure or different capital projects or whichever else. Like, I mean, there's just so much opportunity in Canada. And more than ever today, there is the opportunity for First Nations to be leading this development in our territories, which covers a vast amount of Canada. And we are the rights holders. So to have us involved can bring a lot more certainty. And so coming here and seeing all of this and having the discussions, it's an intimidating world for many of us. Like, we haven't been at the table, at these tables, ever. I'm the first generation. And so it has created a bit of a bridge, and I see what you guys are trying to create. And I'm thankful for it and very impressed. And I think there needs to be more of that. And there's an opportunity to grow that relationship between Canadian, First Nations, Inuit, and Métis, and investors here in Europe.
There's a lot there. We'll unpack it in a second. But John, same question.
I mean, I would just pick up on what Jolain was saying around like the opportunity set as it was presented at the summit. It's incredible and it's palpable, right? You could feel it in the room, but you can also see it every day in business, right? So I work at a bank. We constantly have term sheets coming through, RFPs coming through, calls set up with key clients. A lot of those same clients were in the room at the summit. So I was also taken, alongside the opportunity with the quality of individuals and the leadership and expertise that was at the summit. You have decision makers, Indigenous leaders, you have government bodies, you have ministers from government, you have financial institutions and other lenders. It was really amazing to see these groups come together and almost brainstorm together what the art of the possible is as it relates to increasing and taking advantage of these same opportunities. And so I leave feeling full. I really feel full coming out of the summit, and understand that the work is ahead, but the work will bear fruit, and you have a lot of willing parties that are so invested in seeing this through to completion.
We started the summit, and the primary purpose is to attract interest, whether it's capital, partnerships, joint ventures in some way from European investors. But we did not appreciate the interest there would be from Canadian delegates coming over to be a part of the conversation, even if they're not on a panel. And I'm working on a transaction at the moment that has its genesis last year at the conference, from Canadians who are neighboring territories, sitting at the conference and watching panelists and saying, why aren't we doing something like that? And that began a conversation that is, we're working on a transaction today.
Yes, and as you both know, it's all about relationships, nature of both the businesses you're in. And John, talking about capital markets conversation, and it was interesting for many individuals, I think at the summit and others, because you led BMO in terms of the launch of the first labeled Indigenous bond in Canada earlier. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because everybody was, oh, there is one.
There is one now. I will say this was definitely BMO-led. There was a lot of stakeholders involved, and this had been a number of years in the making, truthfully, as we thought about how to best profile the great work that our Indigenous banking unit was doing with our Indigenous clients, particularly with the support of our commercial bank, but really touches all areas of our bank. And so the thinking, we started evolving our thinking around the way that we use our sustainable bond framework. So BMO first published a green bond framework in 2019, followed it up with a sustainable bond framework that had 18 categories in 2024, one of which being this socioeconomic empowerment and advancement category that allowed us to, under the framework, which we received an SPO, a second party opinion for, allowed us to ring fence assets that were either loans to Indigenous owned businesses, so 51% Indigenous owned businesses, or direct lending to Indigenous communities, Indigenous governments. So again, through our IBU, we have a massive balance sheet of loans that have been extended. We're able to look at some of the best and brightest of those loans, look at the relationships that we have across several nations, and we're able to create a great outcome for not just for the market, but for our bank in the form of this $200 million Indigenous bond. So it was a 4-year Indigenous bond. We did it by a private placement, just given the size, but maybe a comment on the size. We intentionally went a little bit smaller than we often would have because we're testing the water. We wanted to make sure it was, down the fairway and sort of made, hit all the check boxes and the parts we would want to have for credibility purposes with a labeled bond. The investors lined up for it. I mean, we reversed it in and we talked to, every investor we spoke to took a position in the bond, would have taken 3x, 4x, 5x of the total bond size if we asked. But there was a lot of demand for it. We knew there was pent-up demand. This one was really investor-driven within our Canadian market where, we speak to investors every week and they were continually calling for, this type of financing product. And, with it, I think it's our first foray into this market. Like you said, the first North American bank to issue a labeled Indigenous bond. I hope every financial institution issues labeled Indigenous bonds. We certainly speak to a lot of corporate clients as well that are looking at something similar with the way that they finance their balance sheet. But it's hopefully a very good outcome for the market, but it's just one point where we say, look, this is bringing light to the fact that we need to have more finance flowing to businesses in these communities.
Right. And I think just building on that, just to pivot back to what you've been doing at Deloitte, that's groundbreaking as well. And Deloitte's a global organization. Do you want to talk about some of the challenges and that in the context of the summit and some of the conversations you?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I had actually invited one of my clients to come and attend the summit, a mining company that I'm working with. And I'm working as a facilitator and an integrator and a bridge between a major First Nations in Canada and a proponent who is wanting to develop in the territory. And right now, I can tell you that the approach that I've seen taken in the past is very much that they take their own paths and they hire their own consultants, their own lawyers, and then an opportunity is significantly missed to build an economies of scale in building that bridge and working together as partners versus working as individuals and engaging a community as part of a box that needs to be ticked in a consultation process. Right. And for me, I think there is huge missed opportunity to really see First Nations as a partner and a business partner upfront, and to begin talking to them in that way in order to generate a lot more security and around the asset that is about to be built and in making it sustainable for the future generations. And to be at that table and helping to develop that mine is going to make it a lot more sustainable, and it's going to better mitigate the risks around that project that comes to our communities in that development during operations and then after they're done with the land.
We heard that a lot at the summit. It was on every panel in the hallways, people saying, get to the communities early, don't wait. I had British executives talk to me in the hallways between sessions and said that very thing. They said, we're approaching it all wrong. We've got plans in Canada, but we were going to spend a couple of years developing those plans and present them. We're going to get to Canada right away, start talking to the communities and develop a plan together.
Yeah. And that's where I've seen massive change in Canada over the last decade. It used to be about managing expectations, doing consultation, ticking a box, getting approved, right? Today, you're seeing a whole new Canada with respect to how proponents are engaging communities in a real way, and, we've got the Major Projects Office, we've got Canada talking about nation building every day, which is amazing that, we came out and developed this practice over 3 years ago and the strategy even longer. And now that's a major focus. And I remember at the time we were developing it, our CEO was like, well, don't we want to call it FNMI? Nation building, and I kept pushing back, and God bless him, I love him, and he's honestly changed the face of Deloitte over the last 5-7 years, right? But I said to him, it's not just about building First Nations, Métis, and Inuit. It's about building Canada, and if we do this better, and if we do it together, We have better projects that are more sustainable, that, you know, comply to all your ESG requirements, and, you know, the impacts they can make, I have seen firsthand. It's a huge change from when I grew up, huge. And so we're ready. We're ready for investment. I think more than ever, we are ready for investment, and we have proven success in our projects when it's done right and when it's done with First Nations and on their traditional territories.
That was another theme yesterday, was things have changed in the last even 10 years, and things have changed a lot. And that's one of the things that brought me back after so many years in a great city like London. But to come back to Canada, because it is nation building, it's major projects, things are different than, say, even 10 years ago. And we talked about a lot of the things that are different. But John, to you, what stood out about what might be different that didn't exist? We've now got Indigenous bonds, other financing tools available. We've got big banks like yourselves looking at being more involved.
Yeah, I mean, just on the financing conversation, I mean, just the vehicles that exist, be it government or quasi-government, that have been put in place. And, you know, we heard from, you know, Christian from the Canadian Indigenous Loan Guarantee Programme, so a $10 billion Indigenous loan guarantee from the federal government. We had the head of AIOC, the Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Fund, as well, talking about their loan guarantee program. We have them in Ontario, we now have them in BC, we have them in Saskatchewan. So, you know, having programs like that alongside, you know, existing programs like the Canada Infrastructure Bank and its, you know, Indigenous Equity Initiative, look at Canada Growth Fund even, and some of the opportunities that it presents for allocating capital. I mean, this has all been in the last kind of 5 to 10 years that we've started to see these organizations or these programs be created, recognizing the need to get catalytic capital into the hands of Indigenous people so that they can meaningfully participate, to your point, Jolene, in these projects. And it's not simply a box-ticking exercise. So I think having these programs in place makes a ton of sense. I think the mindset in market, and this is also for most of the general public, has really shifted as well around the types of partners that Indigenous groups can be as it comes to being, you know, asset owners, project owners in these major infrastructure projects. They really are seen as good partners. In many cases, they know the land better, in almost all cases, know the land better than the proponents. That may help with things like permitting. It certainly will help understand how best to proceed with the build out of a transmission line or the building of a pipeline. So I think they're seen as value add partners, and with the capital and the capital programs being put in place in a way that meaningfully gets the capital flowing to the nations when they need it up front in the investment cycle, I think that will be a huge game changer, and is, you know, full kudos to the Canadian government for putting some of that in place. And now it's over to the private sector to figure out ways to really unleash it.
The world we live in has changed dramatically in the past 6 months, and every day there's something going on in the news. Fortunate this time is the Indigenous people are at the table, right? This opportunity has come because people are looking at Canada again, because there's a whole issue about Canada being an energy superpower. Where does Europe get their energy from? Critical minerals, et cetera. All these are hot topics for the investment community as people try and secure their supply chains. And Canada, of course, is a reliable country, great profile in terms of G7, in terms of debt to capital and their capacity to do things. And this time, the Indigenous people are there at the seat of the table. So if you want to invest in Canada, it's a given you're going to have to engage with Indigenous people. So if you don't start early, you're just going to slow down your whole project because they're rights holders.
Yep, and honestly, you've seen that. You've seen that in the past, and I won't name them projects, but you've seen the delays in the past, and that really is, in the last decade, I think Canada and the proponents have become a lot more sophisticated in understanding who the true rights holders are in the territory. I mean, and you have to do your homework in order to really understand, and not just your homework, but you have to engage. You have to go in and you have to try to understand what we are saying, because I will tell you, there is a gap in language. Many times I'm working with nations. That is a lot of my job, is to really understand what the proponent wants and needs, and being very transparent to the nation that this is what's in it for them. But here's what you'd be giving up if you just say no to this project. And making informed decisions is key right now. And more than ever in Canada, I'm seeing a huge shift in our leadership, in coming to the table, participating, learning, asking the right questions. That has been, we used to be a people who were, pounding our fists on the table to get to the table. Well, we're at the table now in Canada. And now more than ever, it's learning about how we interact and how we do business. And I can tell you that I work very closely with nations across Canada in getting them ready to be the partner that they need to be, and to improve governance and to improve the way they make decisions, and creating new vehicles that they can hire the capacity and the capabilities in order to make informed, good decisions on investments that are going to impact them for many generations to come. And you hear it all the time from us. Like, we truly do have a worldview that, we don't just care about making money. We care about building things that are going to make a difference for my kids, my grandkids, and many generations to come. And that creates and puts sustainability as number one in our projects, and which I think can create a lot more certainty in projects and make them more profitable. I mean, if our people are working in these projects and we're hiring our businesses and we have the capacity to work on those projects, it makes the projects much more profitable. And, to me, I've seen it. I've seen where that is possible and what things have been done right in order for that, to create that environment for us to be successful. It's key. And there are many who do it really well.
John, from a European investor perspective, what does the type of change that Jolain's been talking about mean to the risk profile, say, to go from silent partners, if you're lucky, consultation and accommodation, but now equity stakes with local communities involved in projects that affect their communities?
Yeah, so Jolain's, your comments about like risk management and this being an effective tool, this being, i.e. Indigenous equity participation, being at the table as these projects are being built, that in and of itself mitigates risk, because again, these are people who are stewards of the land. They understand kind of major issues and can bring that angle in a way that a proponent will never fully understand, no matter how many team they hire and how much diligence they do on a project site. But I think from a European investor perspective, that'll be relevant, but also the availability of, this catalytic capital that exists in the market. So again, some of the programs I mentioned earlier, suddenly you have investors at the table that have access to cheaper forms of financing. And that in and of itself helps to lower the overall cost of the project vis-a-vis other investors that don't have access to guarantees or other government programs. That lowers risk. I mentioned the permitting idea earlier, just around if you're going through that. I think an example came up at the summit actually, where why do we need a fulsome environmental assessment when we could just ask the actual stewards and landowners?
That's true. I remember that.
Right, whether or not there are any material environmental issues. You may still need it by regulation, but it can be fully informed by the fact that the owners of the land and the stewards really understand the key issues facing it. And then you have this concept of, the way that not just the federal government, but corporates in Canada, the way that they see, Indigenous groups as really preferred investors almost, right? Like they're at the table because the government wants them at the table, but because the proponents want them at the table as well. So when you've created that kind of structure within the capital stack, it naturally leads to risk management, because you have investors that are there for the right reasons, for generational ownership of some of these assets. And that's the right kind of investor to have around, versus one that's a private equity fund or something that's taking a very short view on the ROE potentially. And so I think when you take all of that in context, if I'm a European investor, I'm looking at it and saying, well, at least I know that the other investors, and material investors to the tune of 50+% in some cases, they will have the right intentions for the long-term viability and success of these plans, which for nation-building projects in particular, like these are ones that we need now, but we will have for 50s to hundreds of years as we think about the long term. So I think it really does mitigate risk.
I had that feedback too from a British investor saying, I get it, they're aligned with our thinking. We think in terms of decades. This is a big investor, and I said, I'm getting it now. Indigenous people in Canada are aligned with that kind of thinking. And as we look around the world and look at projects, we don't always find that kind of alignment. And so their eyes were open to that same issue.
But I think, you raised the part about informed consent, right? So, and that actually came up at the summit as well around FPIC, so free, prior, and informed consent, all very important. Informed might be the most important part of it though, right? And proponents play a big role in ensuring that they are providing the full suite of information and diligence available to the nations as they engage with them. These are big economic decisions. When you're an owner, there's downside loss and loss risk as well, of course. And so to become informed means you need to have the financial advisors, the legal advisors, and others around you that can, it can inform you on what the risks and opportunities are associated with an investment. And that's on the proponents. And, in many cases, I know it's the Crown's duty to consult, but the proponents need to be there meaningfully at the beginning and giving the information and informing the nations in a way that will allow them to make the right decision.
And I work with some proponents too that are very open to providing capacity funding to the nation to make informed decisions, right? And this is newer in Canada for sure. And what I'm seeing right now is because I've been talking to the proponents and saying, listen, like, they're not coming to the table because they themselves are dealing with so many issues on a day-to-day basis. And often talent and getting the right capacity to deal with all of this, influx of interest in their territory and people telling them, well, this is good for you, this is good for you. But what is needed and what I'm seeing more and more of is proponents transferring capacity funds into the nation so that we can then come in and help the nation develop their vision and strategy, really consider the economic opportunities that are going to come out of this, and then be provided the 2 years before shovels hit the ground to be able to build their capacity, build their partnerships in order to maximize their benefit and participation within the project under procurement. And what that does is, instead of hiring a company from, way down south to travel up to do the work, it's the nation themselves. And that creates impact in terms of building better businesses that can last way longer, and infrastructure that can last beyond the projects, which is what you want. And it's what we want. But in order to get to the decision-making point, there are many nations that really just need that extra capacity to be advised, to be briefed. And it's not even being advised, because that I'm acting as an objective third party that comes in and gets them the right information and answers their questions that sometimes they don't want to ask upfront, right? And they want to be able to get the information before they come to the table with a proponent. And that's what we're doing right now. That is making a huge difference and getting them to that 2-year timeline. So I understand where the proponent is and when they need to get to that FID, right? That decision-making point. But the nation has many decision-making points before that point. So you have to work backwards, and you have a roadmap that they agree on. And then you start working in order to get them the right information to make the right decisions. But not only that, to get the social license to approve these projects with the proponent takes engagement with communities and surrounding communities when done properly, so that you don't run into a situation where down the line you're working on this project and you think you've talked to the right people, but then all of a sudden there's protests. And so it's very, very important within these projects and to be able to do the work up front and to allow the nation the time and the funds to be able to get the capacity they need in order to make that informed decision.
That social license is so important. Huge. And it's been talked about here over in London for a number of years. the importance of social license in terms of how the financial markets work, et cetera, et cetera. But now in Canada, you're seeing a real practical example. It's not just a concept that's talked about. People are living it every day. So it has been absolutely great to have both of you at the summit.
Yeah, we could go on, and we'll get you each back to talk about developments once we're all back in Canada. Mark, except because he's based in London.
This is my home.
This is your home.
One foot on both sides of the pond.
Thank you both for having the vision to do this. It's huge, and it's something that we need. We need access to international markets and capital. And, in the future, by, decade down the road, I'm really hoping that more and more nations are able to come together to build this, special purpose vehicles to be able to access these markets directly. Like, we are so lucky that we have FNFA and other institutions to help guide us through that. But I mean, down the road, you're seeing it already. You're seeing nations start to jump into this field. But I mean, you guys are building a bridge right now, but we need more of that.
Yes, and we're building a bridge and a platform for the Indigenous people to come to speak to the international capital markets and say, here's our story, because just as you're saying, in terms of social license, they need to come over here. That's the idea, to have a platform so they can have the conversation with the international investors directly, and they can hear, because to succeed in investing in Canada today, your partners are the Indigenous people.
Yeah.
Without a doubt.
Yeah, well, thank you for both being here, but also for what you do every day. To build nations, to build markets for Indigenous people. So,
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to John Uhren and Jolain Foster for sharing their insights with us. And thank you for viewing and listening.
Be sure to share, subscribe, and leave a review on your favorite podcast channel. Thanks for listening to Drumbeats. Until next time.